Hello, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to this video tutorial on getting started in Logic Pro 10. A couple years back, I did an intro video like this for Logic Pro 10, which was pretty new at the time, and it turned out to be my most popular video on YouTube. The reason why I'm making this video is to make an updated video specifically on Logic 10.2, so that some of the 10.1 and 10.2 updates can be accounted for. A lot of things have been moved around since version 10.0, so I just wanted to make a new getting started video for new users who may be jumping into Logic for the first time on versions 10.1 or 10.2. So in this video, I'll cover 7 main essential things to get started in Logic. 1, we'll cover the basics of setting up a Logic project and basic navigation of Logic. 2, we'll use the loop browser to import some loops. 3, we'll use the drummer plugin to create a basic drum pattern for our sort of sample song that we're going to build. 4, we'll use software instruments to lay in some MIDI-based instruments. So in this video, I'll use a bass, like a bass guitar MIDI instrument, as well as like a basic synthesizer. 5, we'll use an audio track to play in some electric guitar using our instrument input on my audio interface. 6, we'll add some effects plugins to do a basic mix of our recording. And then finally, 7, we'll export or bounce the mix as a WAV and MP3 file. So let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is just open up Logic. I'm going to open it up from my Launchpad, but you can open it up from the dock or from your Applications folder as well. So I'm just going to click on Logic Pro 10. We'll get our loading screen. You can see we're on version 10.2.2. And this next dialog is the Startup dialog. If you get the Startup dialog, to start, just click on Create a New Empty Project and then hit OK. If you don't see that dialog, you may be seeing the New From Template dialog, which looks like this. So you're just going to click on Empty Project and then hit Choose. Both of these dialogs will create a new empty project for us. Alright, so this first little dialog that pops up is the New Tracks dialog. Logic has 5 different types of tracks that you can choose from. We're just going to go with an audio track for now, but by the end of this video, we will have used 4 of the 5 different types of tracks. So I'm just going to hit Create, and now you can see that audio track out in the main window. So there's 2 really important things I tell all new Logic users to do before they even start working in Logic. The first is to turn on all of the advanced tools under Logic Pro 10, Preferences, Advanced Tools. These are a set of advanced features in Logic that are often turned off by default when you download Logic for the first time. I make sure to enable all of these functions because otherwise Logic becomes just a glorified version of GarageBand. So make sure to show your advanced tools and enable all of them, otherwise some buttons and features in Logic will be different looking on your end, or in some cases just won't be present on your end. The second really important thing I tell new users to do before they get started is to download all of the Logic sound library. You can find this by going to Logic Pro 10, Sound Library, Open Sound Library Manager. When you buy Logic, it will prompt you to download a basic set of sounds to get started when you open it for the first time. Downloading all of these sound libraries makes sure that you have all of the loops, samples, library settings, and instrument patches that Logic offers. I already have all of these downloaded and installed, so I'm ready to go. Just keep in mind that when you do download these, it could take several hours to download. The next thing we need to do is set up our audio input and output device. If you're using an external audio interface like I am to capture mic sounds and plug in guitars and such, you'll definitely want to make sure you check this and set this up properly. So let's close out the library first. And to set this up, we're going to go to Logic Pro 10, Preferences, but this time we're going to go to Audio. So you can see here that I have an output and input device selected. This is my Focusrite Liquid Sapphire 56, which is a Firewire audio interface. Your I/O device is your interface that is outputting a line level signal out of Logic to your connected headphones or speakers, and it's also the interface that inputs microphone, instrument, or line level signal into Logic for recording. If you don't have an audio interface connected, you'll probably just see the built-in input and output options selected, which means that your audio output from Logic is just going to come out of the main speakers on your Mac or headphones connected to the Mac. I highly recommend that you invest in a basic audio interface, even if it's just a cheap one, because you won't be able to properly plug in a microphone, plug in a guitar, bass guitar, keyboard, and record anything properly. Also, if you don't have an interface, you won't be able to have balanced line level outputs to connect studio monitors. Without it, you'll be stuck with unbalanced headphone jack output, or worse, an unbalanced output to studio monitors. The last thing we need to do before we can start working in Logic is set our I/O buffer size. In simple terms, the buffer size affects two things. One, how much information your Mac can process in your Logic session and not crash or get playback errors. And two, how much recording and playback latency do you hear? So in simple terms, basically when you're recording, you want to work with a lower buffer size like 32 or 64. When you're editing, mixing, working on a project that's already been recorded, or you're adding a lot of plugins, automation, and have a higher track count, you want to use a higher buffer like 1024. If you have a lot going on in your session and try to work at 32 samples, you'll find that Logic will probably encounter playback errors. Likewise, if you try to record with a buffer set high at like 1024, you'll probably hear a noticeable latency or lag in your recording signal, so it's a careful give and take. For this, I'm going to set the buffer size to 64 samples since I'm going to be doing some recording. Then just make sure to hit Apply Changes in the bottom right. Alright, we're almost ready to get started working on our project. I just want to walk you through a few of the main windows in Logic before we get started. So this main window is called the main window. It used to be called the Arrange window in previous versions of Logic. It's the window where you can have different various tracks on your timeline. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. We'll go over some of the zoom features later. On the upper right here, we have a few different buttons. The only one we're really going to use is the loop browser. And so each one of these opens up a different browser, but the only one we're going to use in this video is just the loop browser. So it's this one right here. Pulls up a nice loop browser. You can click on that again to close it out. On the left side, there's three additional, I guess they're not really browsers, but three additional windows. There's the library, you can hide and show that. There's the inspector, that's the I. And then this is just an additional toolbar that adds to your toolbar up here. So I'm going to keep that down so we can have those additional features present. I'm also going to pull up the library, and I'll hide the loop browser for now, but we'll come back to that in just a moment. So those are just a few of the main windows that are attached to the main arrangement window in Logic. One other window that we can pull up separately is sort of like a floating window is the mixer. The mixer you can pull up by pressing Command 2, and you can close it by hitting Command W. You can also pull it up by going up to Window, Open Mixer. And another way to open the mixer is actually to open it within the main window. If you just press X on your keyboard, it'll pull up a separate version of the mixer down here. Some people prefer this, some people prefer the floating window, so I'll probably use both of them. All right, so now that we're sort of familiar with the windows, let's talk about the transport controls. The transport controls are up here. Transport controls basically just allow you to play, stop, record, rewind your session. So you can hit play, and you'll see the playhead move. I can hit stop. You can see the playhead stop. And then after you stop, the stop button turns into the go to beginning button. It sets the playhead back to the beginning. There's also these two buttons are basically forward and rewind. When you press forward, it bumps you ahead by one measure, one bar at a time. When you hit rewind, it bumps you back. Now, all of these playback controls can be done just on the keyboard, so you never actually have to click on these if you don't want to. Start and stop is just spacebar. And then if you want to go back to beginning, you just hit return on your keyboard. And then moving forward and backward by one measure can be done by pressing the left and right bracket keys, specifically the ones that look like a greater than less than symbol. They're actually on period and comma on the keyboard as well. So that's what that'll bump you forward and backward. And you can also actually press shift and you can bump yourself forward or backward when you use those bracket keys, forward and backward by 8 measures at a time. So it's just a quick way to sort of bump yourself around in your session. Another thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the tempo or the BPM of our session. I know that the song that we're going to record today is not at 120 BPM. It's a little bit faster, 128 BPM. So you just double click on your tempo and you type in your new tempo and hit enter. All right, so the very, very last thing we're going to do before we start working in the loop browser is we're just going to save our session. You can save your session just by going up to File, Save, or pressing Command S. There's two main ways you can save your Logic project or your Logic session. You can save it as a package or as a folder. When you save your project as a package, it's basically one all-inclusive file with everything in it. If you save it as a folder, you'll be able to open it up and see like a folder hierarchy with your audio files and everything. I still prefer saving as a folder, but if you want everything sort of nice and neat in one file, you can save as a package. And by default, it will save to the Logic folder on your computer. I'm actually going to save this to my desktop. So I'm just going to go to Carney Mac Pro, just the name of my computer. Go to Desktop, and I'm going to call this Intro Project. And then I'm just going to hit Save. And there we go. All right, so now that we're familiarized with the windows and the playback controls and how to save, and the next part we'll start working with the loop browser and import some audio and import some loops into our session and start building our song. All right, so now that we've got all the introductory material out of the way, let's start building our song with some basic loops. I'm actually just going to start with some basic shaker loops. I don't want anything really too complex because we're actually going to use the drummer plugin to fill in the beat, and we're going to play in the guitar and the bass. So to open up the loop browser, again, you can click right here. Another quick way to open up the loop browser is just to hit O on your keyboard. It'll toggle the loop browser. And as long as you went and you downloaded all of those, all the additional content and all the sound library, you should have a pretty massive amount of loops to work with here. Logic pretty much has everything from guitar, bass, drum beats, Latin percussion. In our case, we're going to use shakers, synths. It has everything in here. So basically, to audition a loop, you just click on it. And you click on it again to turn it off. So there's a lot of different things in here. It's got some chimes. We got some orchestral stuff. We've got some drums in here. Some guitar. So there's really a whole lot of everything in here that you'd really ever need if you're looking to build music with loops. You can also sort of sort through different categories. So for my song, I just want some shakers. So I'm just going to go to percussion and shaker. And it'll basically only show things that fall within those two categories. If I really wanted to, I could go through and I could further reduce down my search by clicking on more categories, or I can just type in exactly what I'm looking for up here at the top. So let's try this African Ghana kit shaker here. Okay, so it's just a basic quarter note shaker loop. Here's another one. And one of the cool things about Apple Loops is that they will actually conform to the tempo of your session. So you can see the original tempo of these two loops is actually two different tempos, 120 and 96, but both of them are conforming to the session tempo of 128. So that's really cool. I should also mention that there's two different types of loops in Logic. The green icons are MIDI loops and the blue icons are audio loops. MIDI loops are composed of MIDI notes and software instruments, whereas audio loops are actual audio recordings. You can use both of them pretty much the same, and you can stretch and compress the time of them, but it should be noted that audio loops, when you sort of conform them to your session tempo, if you try to stretch or compress them too much outside of their normal tempo, sometimes you'll hear some artifacting going on. The way you add a loop into your song is you just drag the loop below your lowest track, and it'll actually create a new track for it. So this one, this African Ghana kit, it created a track with this little shaker icon and my MIDI data right here, my MIDI region or MIDI clip right here in place. So if I want to maybe layer that other one, that ghost kit below it, you can do that. You just drag below your lowest track. So I don't need these audio tracks up here anymore. So I'm just going to hit delete to get rid of those. and I've got my two little shaker loops. To zoom in Logic, you can use these zoom controls right here. This zooms vertically, and this one zooms horizontally. But another way to zoom in and zoom out is just to hold Command and press left and right or up and down on your directional keys. So if you want to zoom horizontally, you hold Command, press left and right. And if you want to zoom vertically, you hold Command and press up and down. So that's just another quick way to zoom in and zoom out. All right, so let's click right before that clip and let's hit spacebar to play this and see what this sounds like. So we get two different loops. Let's just pull this one on top of that one so we can layer them together. So that's pretty cool. I'd like to sort of repeat that idea over and over again. There's two different ways you can do this. The first way is to hover over the upper right corner of a clip and you'll get this little icon. It's a loop icon. You just drag out and you can loop the loop as many times as you want. The way I actually like to do it is I like to click on a clip and press Command R, and Command R will repeat the region. So I can just repeat it as many times as I want. This one's only a 1-measure loop. This is a 2-measure loop, so I had to have this one repeat 4 times, and this one repeats 8 times, but now they're going to play together. Another thing that's kind of helpful regarding like the playback is if I want to start restarting my playback here from measure 2 instead of measure 1, or like anywhere, you know, if there's like a certain area of a song you're working on, maybe I'm just working on this section versus this section. If you drag over your clips and then click on the set locators button right here, remember in order to show that you have to hide and show the second half of the toolbar here. What it'll do is it'll create these left and right locators over the section. And when it's yellow like this, it's called cycle mode. The way you can toggle that on and off is you press C on your keyboard, or you can click this button right up here. Cycle mode is essentially like a loop mode, so I can just hit play and it'll loop this section, but it'll also start playback from that section. And if I decrease the range of the loop range, it'll just play this little section. So this is great if you're just trying to work on one little part of a song and you don't want it to continue playback after that section, and you also don't want to have to keep restarting the playhead. So that's pretty cool. All right, so I've got 2 shaker loops that I like. Let's find one more down here. Let's try this one called Shaker 11. It's got a little deeper sound to it. It's also an audio loop, so we'll drag it down below the lowest track. And instead of just MIDI notes, we get an actual like waveform here. And I'm going to hit Command R a few times just to loop that out. Just going to zoom in. And let's see what that sounds like. Cool. Let's rename all 3 of these tracks just Shaker 1, 2, and 3. So the way you rename a track is you just double click on the track, or the track name, and you type in whatever you want. And if you're naming things in a sequence like I am, you can just hit tab. It'll tab down to the next name. You can type in Shaker 2, tab, Shaker 3. Now let's mix our shakers a little bit. The blue one here, the Shaker 3, sounds a little bit louder than the other 2. And I also maybe want to give these some space. Maybe I want to hear one of them more in the left speaker and one more in the right speaker. So we maybe want to pan these. So I'm going to hit X to pull up my mixer. The fader here controls the levels of the 3 instruments. You can drag the volume down or up on each one individually, or you can drag over the bottom of the channels and you can drag them all up or down as a unit. So I'm going to make Shaker 3 a little quieter than Shaker 1 and 2 because it seems like it's a little louder. This little knob here is the pan knob. Basically, that controls how far left or how far right an individual instrument is. So if I just hit the S here to solo Shaker 2, you can hear that I can move the position of the shaker in the stereo field. Another thing I can do, and this works for almost all knobs and buttons in Logic is if you option click on a knob or a button or a fader, you can actually set it back to its default setting. So if I've got this way down here and I want it to go back to its default setting, you hold option and you click on it. It also works for the pan knobs. If something's far right like this, I can option click on it and make it go back to center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my two fast shakers, which are 2 and 3. I'm going to pan one far left and the other one far right. And I'm going to keep the one that's the quarter note sort of in the center. Let's see what that sounds like. Cool. So now we've got a little bit more space in our loop recording. All right, so that's it for just playing around with some shaker loops. In the next section, I'm going to show you guys how to work with software instruments, and I'm going to lay in sort of like a MIDI bass line. All right, so in this next section, I'm going to show you guys the basics of working with software instruments and how to quantize MIDI recordings. Really, in order to work with MIDI instruments, you really need a MIDI controller, a MIDI keyboard controller of some kind. I'm using a Novation Impulse 49, but there's a lot of other cheaper options out there in the market. If you don't have a MIDI controller, it doesn't mean you can't make MIDI-based music. It just means that you're going to have to sort of learn how to type in each note one by one, and that's not something we're going to cover in this video. So for this, I want to lay in a MIDI bass guitar on top of our shaker loop idea here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new track. And the way you can create a new track is you can click right here. That creates a new track. But there's a shortcut for it as well. Another way to do this is to press Option Command N, and that pulls up the new track dialog. So we're going to create one new software instrument. One thing I want you to take note of before hitting create is under instrument here, it says default patch. You can actually choose a default instrument to start with. I generally like to choose empty channel strip because when you choose default patch, it loads an electric piano with some aux tracks already assigned to it. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say empty channel strip. So software instrument, empty channel strip, one track, and then hit create. All right. So you can see it basically, well, first of all, let's close the loop browser over here. You can see that it put our blank software instrument in between two of our shaker loops. If you want to move a track around, you can just click on it, grab it and move it wherever you want it to go. I'm also going to hit C to turn off my cycle mode. And one thing that it did automatically is it opened up our library. Now, if you want to open that up manually, you can just click on this icon right here and it'll pull up the library. So the library will allow us to choose any number of channel strip settings for our MIDI instrument here. One other thing I should mention is that whatever track you click on, once you start having more than one track, each track you click on, its channel strip will show up right here in the inspector. So this includes a lot of things like the volume, the pan that we talked about earlier, but also any plugins that may be on it, and also the name of the actual instrument itself that's on it. So for our blank channel strip here, there's really nothing on the channel strip, so it's not going to make any sound. So what I'm going to do is, while I have our new software instrument selected, I'm going to go up here to bass, and I'm going to choose the preset called Stinger Bass. And what that does is it loads an instrument preset onto our software instrument. So now you can see the name of the instrument that's on here is called the EXS24. It's a sample-based synthesizer. There's a bass amp plugin, a compressor, a chorus effect, as well as a disabled echo effect. So in order to sort of play around with this instrument a little bit, as long as your MIDI controller is plugged in and working, all you have to do is select that track, hit the R, that's ARM for recording, and play your MIDI controller, and you should hear sound. So it's working for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record a basic bass line over this whole shaker idea here. All right, so to stay in time with my recording, I want to use a metronome. I want to make sure that the metronome is turned on so that I have an audible click at the tempo of 128 BPM. Normally, when you just press play, you don't get a metronome. By default in Logic, when you hit R on your keyboard to record, or you hit the record button up here, by default you will get a metronome sound. So that's what's going to keep us in time. You'll also notice that the click sort of starts 1 bar before measure 1, and that's because we have our count in on up here. I'm actually going to turn that off because I just want to hear 4 clicks, and then I want it to get to measure 2. If you don't hear a metronome click when you hit record, just right-click on the metronome icon up here, and then choose click while recording. So I'm going to play in this little bass line that goes like this. I'm going to play that in, but I'm going to play it in time with the click. So I've got that little 4-bar idea. I'm going to unarm my stinger bass. And one thing I want to do with this MIDI clip here before I use it is I want to quantize it. Quantization just refers to basically cleaning up the timing and fixing the timing of the recording. Let me double click on this clip and it'll open it up in the piano roll editor down here. Piano roll is basically like the most standard form of MIDI editing. Just like the main window, the piano roll editor has its own set of zoom controls. So I can zoom vertically and I can also zoom horizontally, just like so. So what I'm going to do first is I can see that I played one little extra note here. I must have barely just graced that key. So I'm going to drag over that note, just this note right here, and hit delete. So the next thing I want to do is I want to sort of determine what rhythm I need to quantize my MIDI recording to. If you're a musician and you understand the basic fundamentals of rhythm, this will be very easy for you. If you're not a musician, this will take a little bit more practice. But basically, I'm looking at these grid lines, and these grid lines represent 16th notes by default. I can see that from what I'm playing, almost every single note lands on one of those grid lines. It's just a lot of them are a little bit before, and some of them are a little bit after those grid lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag over all those notes. And over here where it says time quantize, I'm going to choose a value of a 16th note, which is already selected, and then hit the little Q button here. And you'll see all of those notes snapped to the nearest 16th note. So if you're playing something faster, you may need to choose something faster than a 16th note. If you're quantizing something that's longer, you may need to choose a longer value, like an 8th note or a quarter note. So now that we've quantized our bass recording here, it should sound a lot tighter rhythmically in our song. Earlier I explained that you can select a clip and you can hit the set locators button up here so that you can loop that area continuously and also adjust where your playback starts. Another way to do this without using the cycle mode is to drag over a clip, and no matter where your playhead is, as long as that clip is selected, you can press, instead of just spacebar, you can press shift spacebar, and what that'll do is it'll place the playhead on your selection. So it's called play from selection. So shift spacebar. Or if I wanted to start playback from here, I could hit, again, select this and then hit shift spacebar. So that's another way to do it. So let's go ahead and use the Command R feature, just like we did before, to repeat the bass line. Cool. And let's loop this whole thing one more time just by dragging over all of this and hitting Command R one more time. So now we have a 16-bar phrase rather than an 8-bar phrase. All right, so in this next section, I'm going to show you guys how to add the drummer plugin to our song. The drummer plugin is a new plugin, a new instrument included with Logic 10 that it's really cool. Basically what it does is it auto-generates drum patterns based on complexity and volume options, as well as different genres and different individual playing styles of sort of these fictional drummers. So what I'm going to do is first let's create a drummer track. So we go up to track, new tracks, or you can use the option command shortcut we used before. And we're going to make sure that we choose the drummer option up here. Now it actually lets you choose what genre you're in just from the start, but I'm going to stick with rock just to begin with, and we'll go from there. So let's hit create. And it creates a new drummer track for us with a couple drummer clips or drummer regions. Now you can see that the drummer regions are off by 1 measure, so I'm just going to pull these over. So let's see what this sounds like just to start. So I'm going to click on one of my drummer tracks and hit Shift spacebar to start from that selection. So that's Kyle. That is one of the rock drummers and one of the rock kits. If you click up here on the genre, you can choose from different genres. So in the rock genre, we've got these 6 different drummers here, all with their own individual playing style. For this, I don't think we really need a rock drummer. I think we need more of like an alternative drummer. So let's go to alternative. Let's go to Gavin here, and let's see what Gavin sounds like. Cool, that's a little more funky, a little more groovy. I like that a little bit better. Let's just start with our first clip here. What I want to do is I really want the drums, I want the kick and the snare to sort of follow the bass. So one of the things you can do with drummer is down here there's this follow button. And if you click that, it'll make the kick and snare follow another track. So let's make it follow the stinger bass. Let's see what that sounds like. That's cool, but it's just a little too much. Let's try the Prospect Park patch. So, by the way, when you click on these presets, it changes the overall groove. So let's see what the Prospect Park sounds like. And I just soloed the drummer plugin by clicking the S there. I like the groove, but I want sort of a simpler hi-hat pattern. Let's try dragging the hi-hat from pattern 4 over to pattern 3 and see if that's a little bit more simple. Yeah, I like that a lot better. Another thing you can do is there's this XY pad that controls the complexity and loudness of the pattern. So you can have the pattern be loud and complex, loud and simple, simple and soft, and simple and complex. I want somewhere in between, kind of loud and complex, but not too complex. Let's put it like about there and see what that sounds like. All right, so next I'm just gonna click on our drummer clip here and hit Command R just to duplicate it over here again. I'm just gonna set the locators around it. And this one I'm gonna go back to that Grand Avenue setting. Let's see what that sounds like. Let's try a different hi-hat setting. Let's try hi-hat 4 here. Nah, that's too much. Let's go back to 3. Cool. Let's see what all of that sounds like with the whole mix in here. By the way, instead of just clicking on the S to solo and unsolo a track, you can also hit S on your keyboard. That'll also do it. So let's see what this whole thing sounds like with all the music in there. Awesome. So that sounds pretty good. Let's just roll out our drummer plugin there. One little thing I want to show you guys. Well, first let's collapse the library here. If you want to zoom everything to fit the window, there's a neat little shortcut. If you just click on the background to deselect everything, and then you hit Z on the keyboard, it'll actually zoom to fit everything to the window. So if you want to sort of zoom down or zoom up your entire song to fit the window, you just hit Z on the keyboard. All right, so in the next section, I'll show you guys how to use audio tracks, how to use guitar track to record DI guitar. All right, so in this next section, what we're going to do is we are going to track some electric guitar using an audio track or a guitar track, as well as Logic's new amp designer plugin. So let's create a new track, Option Command N. You can really use either an audio or a guitar track for this. It doesn't really matter. They're basically identical. When I choose the guitar track, I'm just going to make sure that I don't load the default track, and I'm going to turn off the input monitoring option, because normally it comes with these three on. I'm just going to turn those three off, but I will open up the library. Now, as you're going to see on the guitar track, you'll see we're getting signal on the meter, and that's because right now the input on the track is input 1. Well, that's where my microphone's plugged into right now, so that's why we're getting signal on that track. My guitar is actually plugged into an instrument level input on my interface on channel 3. So let's, on our input here, change this from input 1 to input 3. So there we go. So you'll also notice on the guitar track itself, there's another option here. So we have our mute, we have our solo, we have our arm for recording, or record enable, whatever you want to call it. But there's also this I. The I stands for input monitoring. And what input monitoring does is it allows you to monitor the input signal on the track without actually recording. So this is a way for us to test to make sure that our guitar signal's coming through. So I'm just going to play a few chords on my guitar, and let's see if it's coming through okay. So we're all good there. The next thing I want to do is I want to actually tune up my guitar. Logic has a built-in guitar tuner, which is really cool. So you just click on this icon right here. This is tuner. And we're going to tune up our guitar, just standard tuning. So E, A, D, G, B, E. And there we go. Cool. So now that the guitar's in tune, let's choose a library setting for it. So if you click on one of your audio tracks or guitar tracks and you open up your library, you'll be able to go to electric guitar here, electric guitar and bass. I'm going to go to clean guitar, and the preset I'm going to use is called Small Bright Combo, and it will apply that channel strip to the track. Now, it's not just the amp designer, the new amp designer in Logic 10 that is being applied to the track. It's also some other presets as well. The amp designer is right here. It says amp. You can pull that up and you can adjust your amp settings. You can adjust the microphone placement. You can adjust what sort of cab you want, and also what sort of head you want. But there's also some other effects on here. Let's see what this sounds like right now. I like the tone, but I don't like that extra little echo on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this tape delay plugin, and I'm going to click on the far left of it just to turn it off, to bypass it. Let's see what that sounds like now. So it's still got a little bit of reverb on it, and that reverb is coming from the amp plugin itself. So I'm going to turn down the reverb level on this one just a touch. I want to touch a reverb, but not too much. That sounds good to me. Let me try a different pickup on my guitar. Let me try the other one. Yeah, I definitely like this one better. Maybe just a touch less of the high end. So let's go to the EQ in here and pull the treble down a bit. All right, so I'm going to give this a shot. What I'm going to do is arm the track for recording now. One thing I'm going to turn back on is I'm going to make sure that the count in is in. That just gives me enough time to reach over to my guitar here. I only have 8 beats before I have to start playing now. I'd only have 4 beats if I turn the count in off. So I'll give this a shot. The part goes like this. I'll try to play that as cleanly as I possibly can. So I'm just going to hit R to record. Cool. That sound good? One thing I'm going to do, it's a common technique that I do, is I always double up my rhythm guitars. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click right below, while I have this track selected, double click right below it. What that does is it creates an identical type of track. So this was a guitar track, but it was an audio track. And if you double click while you have an audio track selected, it'll create another audio track. Likewise, if I click on a MIDI track or a software instrument track and then double click, it'll create another software instrument track for you. So another thing I'm going to do, I'm going to open up my mixer by hitting X. And what I'm going to do is on my small bright combo track, while that's selected, I'm going to press Option Command C. What that does is it basically copies the entire channel strip setting of that track with all the effects on it. Then I can click on the next one over, the new one that we just created, and hit Option Command V. And what that does is it pastes the channel strip setting. So now I have a duplicate channel strip setting over here. So the first one we created, I'm going to pan that over to the left. The new one we created, we're going to pan over to the right. I'm going to pull the volume down just a touch. And then what I'm going to do, hit X to get out of the mixer, is I'm going to arm the new one down here. I'm going to play a duplicate of what I just played, just so I can layer up a left and a right guitar. It's just going to make it a lot thicker sounding. So we'll give this a shot. Cool. So now what we can do is we can go into this guitar part and edit it, and we can loop it out just like we did with the other instruments. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my snap mode up here. By default, I've been using smart mode, which basically intelligently snaps edits to the grid lines. I'm going to change this to bar mode, so it snaps to the measures, the bars. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to snap regions to absolute value. By default, I believe it's on relative value, so change it to absolute value. And what this is going to do is when I hover over the right side of this clip, you'll see this little tool pop up. This is your trim tool. And if you drag to the left, it will automatically snap your edits to the bar. So we can do the same thing at the front end too. The problem here is that we've got a little bit of overlap because I was a little bit ahead of time on the second guitar, but that's okay. We'll deal with that later. So let's snap this over to measure 2, just like so. And now I've got this sort of loopable 8-bar clip, just like we've been doing with all of our MIDI. So I can hit Command R and duplicate that over. Now, to deal with the fact that we have that little bit of overlap here and overlap over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right here to turn off my snap mode. It basically turns off the snapping to the grid. So what I can do is I can go into these guitar tracks, hover over that sort of junction point or joining point, and I can let the front end of the waveform come out a little bit better so it doesn't get chopped off. Another thing we can do is we can hold Shift and Control and drag over that, and it'll create a little crossfade for us too, so our edit's nice and clean. So I'm going to do the same thing at the beginning too. I'm going to fade in, or zoom in rather, trim the front end up, and just put a little fade on both of these. You can, again, you can do it 2 clips at a time. You just drag over both of them, hold Shift and Control, drag from the outside or the inside to the out, and it fades them both. So let's see what that sounds like with everything in there. Cool, that sounds great. So in the next section, I'm going to show you guys how to do just a basic mix down of this, and then after that, we'll export or bounce our session as a WAV and MP3 file. In this next section, what we're going to do is just do a basic mix down of our song and just make everything sound nice and tight in the mix. We're going to make sure we hear all the instruments. Probably going to pull some of the levels down, maybe play with the drummer plugin a bit, play with the bass a bit, maybe play with some EQ and compression a bit. So first thing I'm going to do is just close out the library. We don't need that anymore. I'm going to drag over all these clips, set my locators, just so I can play just that section. Click on the background to deselect everything and hit Z just to fit everything to the window, but I am going to sort of zoom out a bit here for the vertical zoom. I'm going to hit X to pull up the mixer, and let's give this a listen. So immediately what I hear is I want the guitars to be lower, and I want the shakers to be lower, but I kind of want to hear shaker 3 a little bit more, so we'll do that. Let's give that a shot. One thing you want to make sure that you do when you mix, and again, this is not a in-depth mixing tutorial, it's just an overview, really. You want to look at your stereo output here and make sure that you don't clip. If a lot of your instruments are really high up in the mix like this, really loud in the mix, you'll find that the top end of your meter here will start to turn red. That means you're clipping, and the individual tracks can clip as well. That's bad because it means that your waveforms are getting rounded off and they're not going to sound as clear, and your transients, your percussive information is not going to sound as clear in the mix. So in general, you should sort of mix at a lower level and make sure that the stereo output does not clip. We'll add a mastering preset to this to sort of bring out volume later. Cool, so we're not clipping it at all, that's good. Next thing I'm going to do is with the drums. You may have noticed this early on when we were working with the drums earlier, but when you create one of the drummer plugins, it actually creates an auxiliary channel strip over here with reverb on it. I don't really want to get too deep into how aux tracks work, but basically you'll notice that it automatically creates a bus or send on the track. The more you pull this up, the more reverb you're going to hear in the drums on this track over here. So I'm just going to solo the reverb by itself and hit play. So I'm just pulling this little knob up here, and the more we pull that up, the more wet signal we hear, the more reverb signal we hear. What I am going to do is I'm going to go into the actual reverb plugin, which is called Space Designer. It's the middle plugin here. I'm going to click on that. We're going to choose a different reverb. Let's choose something that's a little bit more ambient. So in all of your plugins in Logic, you can click on this little menu at the top and choose presets. So I'm going to go to medium spaces, plate reverbs, and use the drum plate. I'm going to pull the reverb amount up a bit. And let's see what this one sounds like. Yeah, it's a little more wet sounding, a little more ambient sounding than the other one. Let's solo the drums too, just so we can hear the drums and the reverb together. So you can hear when I pull up this aux track, you hear more of the reverb, and down you hear less of the reverb. So I'm going to pull that up just a bit so we can have a bit more ambient drum sound. The next thing I'm going to do is with the shakers. The shakers, I really want them to be a lot brighter sounding. So let me arm those and just play those by themselves. I feel like I'm hearing a lot of the mid-range. I want to hear more of like the high range. On the first two shaker loops, there's a channel EQ plugin. I'm going to go ahead and click on the left side of that plugin, and then click on the middle to open it up. And the preset I'm going to use on this is under EQ tools. It's just called Presence plus 12 dB. Just going to bring up the high end quite a bit. You can remove a plugin off the channel strip just by clicking on the far right side of it, clicking and holding, and going to No Plugin. And what we can do is we can duplicate this same EQ over to our other two shaker tracks by holding Option and then clicking and dragging it over. So we're duplicating that same EQ setting over to all three shakers. So we get a bit more of like a bright shaker sound now. So I like that. One other thing we can do is to the bass. The bass is just not fat enough. It doesn't really stick out to me. Just like the guitar amp designer, there's also a bass amp designer. So we can click on that plugin, pull that up. Let's try a different setting here. Let's try the 70s solid. So I just pulled up the mid-range, the treble a bit. Now, we've also got a compressor plugin on here, the comp plugin there. Let's click on that. Let's choose a different preset in the compressor too. Notice that I'm not using any of the individual controls in the plugins because I'm assuming, this being an intro video, that you don't know what any of this does yet. So I'm just using presets right now. Let's go to guitars and let's use bass heavy. Let's see what that does. Yeah, it's a little harder hitting that way. Let's go back to the bass amp though. Let's pull the gain up a bit. We'll pull the gain on the compressor up a bit and the gain on the master up a bit as well. Yeah, I want a little more slappy sounding. Let's see what all that sounds like now. There's also a compressor on the drummer plugin. Let's pull that up. Let's go under the presets here, go to drums. Let's go to Type R Tight Drum Kit. Let's try that out. Yeah, that makes the drum sort of pop out a bit more. And one thing I'm not happy with on the drum kit is the kick drum. I don't really hear the kick drum popping through the mix very well. As opposed to playing with the effects plugins, one thing you can do is you can actually play with the actual instrument itself. So like on our bass, our instrument was the EXS-24. Well, on our shakers and our drum kit, the instrument's called the drum kit. It's a new instrument in Logic 10. So if we just click on the plugin drum kit, it'll pull up our drum kit here. We click on the kick drum. We can hear the actual sample that's being used for the kick drum. Let's try Brooklyn 3 over here instead of Brooklyn 1. See, that's a little more slappy and it pops out in the mix a little bit better. And we can also pull the gain up on it so it's about a lot louder. I just want that to sort of pop out in the mix better. Let's try the snare drum too. Yeah, I like the original snare. I just want the gain to be up a bit just so it's a little bit louder. So let's give that a shot. Let's see what all that sounds like together. Cool. So we've got this all mixed the way we want it. The master output or the stereo output here is not clipping at all, so that's good. One thing you can do is you can apply a master channel strip setting to this, just for mastering, just to sort of equalize the loudness a bit if you like. What we can do is on the setting tab on the master out or the stereo out, click and hold on that, go down to factory, and we can add just sort of a master fader setting. So let's just go to, I'll use the factory pop setting. Let's see what this sounds like. So this adds compression and limiting and EQ just to sort of, bring out the mix overall on the master fader. All right, so now that we've got our song mixed the way we want, the last thing to do is just to export our entire project out of Logic as a single wave or MP3 file. The terminology that Logic uses to export a file out is actually called bounce. It's a throwback from the days of bouncing tape machines together. But the way you're going to bounce a file in Logic, or the easiest way I find, is to drag the cycle range or the locators over the area that you want to bounce. And typically what I do is I will make sure to turn off my snap mode, but give the bounce range a little bit of room in front of the mix. So I'm just giving it like a little bit of room just so it doesn't come in right on the bar line. It comes in a little bit before the bar line. And then at the tail end, because of reverb and things like that, and any notes that might ring, we may want to pull this out quite a bit, maybe a few seconds or so. So that's how I'm going to select the range for bouncing. And then what you do is you go up to File, Bounce, Project or Section. You can press Command B as well. If you want to bounce as a wave and an MP3, you want to make sure that you check PCM and MP3. You can also bounce as an AAC M4A file. You can also burn directly to CD if you like. So for my PCM format, these are your uncompressed audio formats, AIFF, WAV, and core audio formats. I'm going to use WAV. I'm going to bounce to CD format, so 16-bit 44.1. Under MP3, we can set the bit rate. So I'm going to choose a little bit lower format, 160K. And then you can choose between a real-time and an offline bounce. A real-time bounce will actually play the song as it bounces. An offline bounce does it a lot quicker. Now, there's certain situations where you may want to actually use a real-time bounce, but none of them really apply to this video, to an intro video like this. So one last thing you may want to do before bouncing is normalize the track upon bouncing it. Normalization essentially involves pulling up or sometimes pulling down the peak level of the song so that the peak level rests at 0.0 dBFS. That's the loudest in dBFS or digital levels that a typical wave file can go to without clipping. So if your master stereo output doesn't clip but the level is really low, you can choose to normalize the bounce up to its maximum peak level. You can also choose overload protection, which normalizes the track down to 0.0, so if it's clipping for some reason, that'll be taken care of. But as long as you follow my rule of mixing at lower levels to keep the master stereo output from clipping, you shouldn't ever have to use this option. So I'm just going to choose off because I know I don't need it. I'm just going to hit OK. It's going to ask us where we want to save this to. It by default saves it to a bounces folder in our Logic project. So right here. So next we just need to give our bounce a name. I'll just call it intro song and then hit bounce. It'll bounce out our whole session. And then once that loads, it finishes loading there, or finishes bouncing rather, we should be able to go to our session, which we called intro project. Go into our bounces folder, and there's our two files, our MP3 along with our WAV file. So let's play the MP3 and see what this sounds like. All right, that sounds great, especially for just using all stock sounds in Logic. Logic's really great for having some great selections of sounds and patches to pick from for only $200. So hope you guys enjoyed this video on getting started in Logic Pro 10, and thanks for watching. Hey guys, if you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel to see multiple new videos added every week. Also, you can check out carnymediagroup.com, where you can view all of my video tutorials, search for specific topics, download the videos ad-free, and in some cases you can purchase session content so you can work along with me in the video. Also, please consider giving a monthly contribution at patreon.com/MusicTechHelpGuy. As always, thanks for your support and thanks for watching.